Hello, everybody. Caroline will continue to let folks in, but we'll go ahead and get started here. Thanks, everyone, for joining us today to talk about financial oversight for nonprofit leaders. Sarah, do you want to say a few words about our fantastic program before we dive into some introductions?
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Amy. Hi, everybody. Good afternoon. My name is Sarah Tran, for those of you who I haven't had a chance to meet yet. I am the capacity building consultant for Communities of Opportunity, which is the initiative that is sponsoring this workshop. For those of you who might not be as familiar with COO, although I think most of you are, COO began in 2014 as a partnership between King County and Seattle Foundation, working together to really partner with communities in addressing inequity. And so the capacity building work that is a part of COO is really meant to come alongside all of the amazing organizations and groups that you all represent, and really supporting you and sharing the stories of the incredible work that you're doing, helping to strengthen skills that you might be needing in your work and wanting to further refine, as well as sharing information that can help to strengthen the work as well. And so with that, I will hand it back over to our wonderful finance expert and a friend and colleague of mine today, Amy Michael.
Great. Thanks, Sarah. And thanks for introducing yourself there. I'll say a little bit about myself. And while I'm doing that, it would be great if folks could put into the chat your name and your organization, your position or how you're related to the finance function at your organization, and then maybe a question or a learning goal that you're hoping to get out of today. That really helps us and helps me actually shape the workshop as we go. And then just a note on logistics, you're welcome to come off mute and ask questions as we go. You can also use chat, raise hand, or really just cut right in. It's always better when it's a conversation, and many of you are truly the experts because you're making it work every day. So my name is Amy Michael, and I'm so excited to be here in case you can't already tell. I love talking with nonprofit folks about finance for sure. And I am also super passionate about making finance more clear and understandable and accessible to folks in the nonprofit sector, particularly, and both increasing your confidence, but also breaking down some of the barriers and myths that we have around finance that kind of keeps us out of these conversations and spaces. I'm really passionate about working to dismantle systems of oppression and to call out racism and white supremacy. And in finance and accounting, I get the opportunity to do that a lot. As a white woman, I also believe that part of my work is not to be the one speaking all the time with the mic in my hand. And so, I'm excited to be part of this pilot program. I'm grateful to Sarah Tran for inviting me to do this work with her. She's been a friend and a peer and a generous teacher for many years, and really helped me find my place in this work. And we, as we're doing this pilot, I know that part of the project of the pilot, if it's successful, is going to be, Sarah and I envision success as that we would invite other voices to be at the forefront of providing this financial support for organizations. And so I know part of my work will be stepping back too. So thanks for spending time with me today. It's really a privilege to work alongside of all of you in the work we do together. And we will dive right in. I didn't get a chance to read where people are from, but we've got lots of great organizations. Choose 180. I know we've got Feast here, Latino Community Fund. Bunch of people. Okay, cool. Thank you for putting that in there. Let's dive in. Let me move my faces around. Not all my faces, your faces. Okay, so let's start with really just talking about what is financial oversight. We're going to talk about our own definition here that we've come up with as part of this project of supporting this group of folks with financial oversight. So this is our working definition, is that it's an understanding of the financial functions throughout the organization, and particularly in program, annual, and long-term planning cycles. we're going to take a look at financial oversight in a couple of different buckets. This workshop is really intended for all of you that are here. I know some of you work really closely with operations and accounting, and I know some of you are several steps away, but have responsibilities around understanding that story. So this is the right place for you. So the way we're going to look at financial oversight in these buckets is, first, we're going to think about it as like telling this story of where are we now. Really, a lot of financial and accounting components of nonprofit work is really just about storytelling. And when we can think about it like that, it's more accessible to more people for sure, instead of thinking about it as just like number crunching and bean counting. So where are we now is really, what is the financial story of our organization and our work? The second piece is, where are we going? So once we know where we are, creating a shared understanding of the financial goals, both short-term and long-term. So that might be, how are we making payroll this week? What is our cash flow for the coming year? How are we budgeting to spend money next year? And what do we envision our business plan being 5 years from now? And then finally, a really key part of financial oversight is taking a look at the organizational culture inside your organization and kind of putting it to the test of like, do I have a financially forward organizational culture? And a couple of, I would say, tenets of that might be transparency versus a culture of secrecy, which is a very strong tradition around finances, to create a tradition of secrecy. So creating a tradition of transparency takes work and attention. And then accountability. When we set goals, we report on goals, we hold ourselves and others accountable for the commitments that we're making. And then ethical financial behavior, which is a fancy, pretty way of saying we have a lot of, we have internal controls. People understand why we do things the way we do them, and generally, want to support that kind of compliance and that kind of ethical financial behavior. All right. So we're going to dive into each of these 3 areas. I'm going to show you some tools that we'll make available to you after we finish today, and show you some samples, and then we'll have an opportunity for you to share your thoughts and progress and struggles in your own organizations as well. So starting out with where you are now. I'm sorry, I'm pausing a little bit because I'm just peeking over at the chats. I can't help myself. I have to look. Okay, so where we are now. A couple of the things that we want to look at when we're thinking about where we are now and assessing that is, does our organization have the resources to produce timely and accurate financial statements and internal financial reports? It's a really good place to start, because for those of you who are department and organizational leaders, that's going to be your main pipeline into being able to tell that financial story. And if you don't have access to that, it's just a great place to start to try to drill down and figure out what's missing so that we can get there. And a couple of key components, great first places to look. Do we have trained and confident finance staff? So, I mean, as a finance person, I've spent plenty of my career not always feeling confident, and that's always something to look at. Finance staff want to get stuff right, and so if they're not feeling great about their work, it's worth asking questions about why that's so. And then, do we have adequate systems? So do we have the software and the processes and the policies and the oversight? Those are just a couple places to look. Another key question when we're thinking about where are we now with our financial oversight is, our key stakeholders able to tell the financial story of the organization confidently? So that might be leadership staff, board members, line staff, anyone in the organization. Can we kind of tell that story? I know a lot of you have experienced pretty significant growth as you've taken on responsibilities around the pandemic and absorbing additional funding to provide additional support for those that need it during this time. And so part of that financial story of growth, that can be really complicated to tell, because sometimes we're running so fast to keep up with the growth that we aren't we haven't taken the time to figure out how to tell that financial story. So this is a great opportunity to take a breath and think about how we get our arms around that. And you're here, so you're already doing it. So a couple of things that work as solutions in this space are having financial reports that meet the needs of different audiences. So that means like the stack of reports that has to go to the auditors isn't going to be the same thing the board of directors wants to see, isn't going to be the same thing that's meaningful to staff, isn't necessarily going to be the same report that helps managers and leaders in the organization make day-to-day operational decisions they need to make to meet the goals. One of my favorite ways to right size reporting for folks is to use dashboards. And we'll take a look at some examples of dashboards later. They're really an effective storytelling piece. And they will come at the end because we first have to understand sort of the brick and mortar financial statements that go into creating the foundation of the story. And then another great solution is really to train audiences to read reports. And boards, I think, are the first people that come to mind. We sometimes assume that board members bring a lot of particular expertise around nonprofit management, and that's often not the case. And so they ask questions where they know to ask. So the more you can train them about how you want them to read your financial statements, the more you can have boards showing up in conversations the way you want them to show up. Before we move on to where we're going, any comments or questions about where we are now or experiences folks have had with how we feel about, like, are we getting reports? Do stakeholders get reports? You can chat or come off mute if you want. Cool. I know you'll have things to say later. So we'll move on to where we're going. When we're looking at where we're going, we're talking about those short-term and long-term financial goals. So that might be cash flow forecasting, annual budgets, multiple year budgets. And when we're thinking about the financial oversight of where we're going, these are some of the key questions that we might ask. And I'm actually going to, right shortly after this, we're going to take a look at a checklist that I've developed with support of a lot of materials that I've sourced from other resources, of course, that you can use to answer all these questions in your organization and make a plan. All right, so who's involved in creating your plans? Is the board involved? How is the board involved? Are managers involved? Are staff involved? So sometimes budgets get written and developed in the finance office or the executive director's office with the finance person sitting close by. And, you know, in a pinch, when we are under extreme time deadlines, you know, that's just the way it has to be. Better practice would be to involve as many people as possible. More folks that are involved in the budget process, the more folks will, be able to be accountable for those plans. And we learn so much by bringing in staff into the conversations about that process, because the staff are the ones that know how the work's getting done with clients or on the front line or in public, and knows what resources or investments might be needed to have it go better. So there is another workshop coming up 3 weeks from today. Mark your calendars. That'll be more of a deep dive into planning and budgeting and forecasting. So we can talk about that more then. The next question in this where are we going area is, are we even doing short-term and long-term planning? I've worked with nonprofits that were really just doing a budget to tick the box of doing the budget, doing the governance, having something to send funders. Budgeting gets really exciting when it's part of a bigger plan and process that is aligned with your long-term vision and goals, really monetizes those plans and becomes like a living working document that you can use to help make decisions, help frame conversations with the board.
Sorry. Molly, did you have a question? I just saw you come off mute for a second.
It was a slip of the hand.
Oh, okay. Well, if anyone does have questions, please feel free to jump in. Yes. I know that finance is there are a lot of different components to it and a lot of different details. And we want to make sure that folks actually get as many of their questions answered as we can address today. And then of course, there'll be continuing support and other type of resources later. But I love seeing some of the questions that have already been in the chat when folks are introducing themselves. And we also want to welcome you to, again, like Amy said, come off mute and, you know, share what's going on at your organizations or things that you're hoping to learn a little bit more about today.
Yes. Thanks. Okay. The next question that we might ask in this area of where we're going forward are, what are the principles, goals, or North Stars that are guiding our financial plans? It's a great way to put our money where our mouth is. And so I know, because I've worked with several of you on this, like I know that, you know, when we think about budgets, really, it does come off the page and get more alive when we can align them with our organizational goals in really meaningful ways. And this might involve, you know, finance bumps up against strategy and program planning a lot. A clear logic model or a clear case statement. You know, what are you doing and how are you going to do it? What follows next is, you know, what are the investments we need to make to pay for it? And then how are we going to raise resources we need to make those investments? And then really important, does the organization hold itself accountable to the plans? It's so much easier to tell our stories when things are going well. It is a lot harder to tell our stories when things get off track. I think we've all had a crash course in that with the pandemic, because that was not something any of us predicted. Getting good at telling those stories builds enormous amount of trust from stakeholders in the community. Staff love it, board members love it. We love it as leaders and storytellers too, because it's such a relief to just figure out great ways to tell the truth about stuff, even the hard stuff. And so that's a great question to ask. And for about 7 years, I was the chief financial officer at Fair Start. And we were not great at telling our hard stories, but that's something we worked on while I was there. And to tell this story of failed projects or failed pilots got to be kind of a thing we wanted to get really good at. And it was very freeing to get to that point. Just looking at more questions here. Okay, great. Okay. The third place I like to look, well, we just kind of previewed it too, was organizational transparency, accountability, and ethics. And you know, some of the things that we want to look at is like how widely throughout the organization is financial information spread. Sharing financial information with your staff is a great way to build transparency and accountability. A lot of times, many of you may have experience with this looking at staff satisfaction surveys, but you know, if there's not transparency, a lot of times employees think there's like intentional secrets, when in fact, it may just be we have not dedicated the time and resources to distributing information throughout the organization. So sharing financial information, training staff on how to understand it, that's probably dashboards, not the whole set of financials, is a really great way to do that.
We've got a question from Ty.
Oh, great.
Ty, you want to unmute yourself?
Yes. Okay, so I didn't know how long you were going to be on the budget one, so you jumped on transparency. So I wanted to ask a couple questions. Yeah. So obviously, I'm kind of a small organization that started in the grassroots area and really focusing on for so many years the resources, because at that time Kent wasn't really getting a lot of grants, and most of the grants that was coming in for the organizations was the larger grants. Yeah. So a smaller outreach organizations just learn how to master resources. And for so long, that's kind of what I know my organization, along with many other, whether it's outreaches or church organizations, we just learned how to master resources. Yeah. Now, because of the pandemic, everybody's saying, hey, you guys can get in the pot now. You know, they're throwing us in the pot. They're kind of saying, hey, you know, there's money. We want to give it to these organizations that haven't been getting money and been able to do all these great things with just resources. I think for me is with learning in this this workshop is now getting these or filling out these grants, and obviously a lot of the grants are talking about budgeting and planning budget. And I'm finding out that they're saying, hey, you can incline all those resources into a budget format, which I'm like, how in the world do you do that? But you're getting thousands and thousands of dollars of incline, and they're saying, hey, you can turn that into a budget. So I'm hoping that, I don't know if this actually workshop is going to be really breaking down on how to transition from a grassroots into really talking about if you're going into that route of transition your incline into being able to propose it into a budget.
And when you say incline, what are you referring to?
For us, especially for my organization, I mean, we have partnerships with Union Gospel Mission, Costco, for food, and they're giving us pallets. I'm talking about, I'm feeding with my organization over 3,000 people a week. We're giving homeless over, outreaching them over thousands of clothes and food and shoes and resources, and seniors, we're doing the same. So the capacity is a large amount of people that we're helping, but we haven't really been in the grant world because we've been able to master the resource world.
Right.
And so now with the funding, it's kind of like, and I realized that the grant world is its own beast. Like everybody kind of know each other. Once you get a grant, everybody's in its own circle. So it really kind of, even though we're helping, or I know in my organization, helping good over 4,000 people, has been able to help it with resources.
Yeah.
Not so much as I mean, we have private funders, but as far as with the grant world,
right,
we haven't been in that world.
Right. And that, I mean, that is a whole, you're absolutely right. The finance, budget, accounting complexity of being an organization that is bringing in non-monetary resources and redistributing them, being able to account for that. So absolutely, like when you're taking in food donations from folks and clothing donations from folks, there's not an exact science to how you measure the value of that, but lots of organizations have kind of figured out how they do it. So, we aren't going to get into the details of that. And I'm happy to actually talk about that in-kind donations in the budget workshop in a couple of weeks. I can bring some resources for that. But other, resources might be like other food banks. They have like a $1 per pound estimate that they do to like monetize the amount of food donations they get in.
Yeah, they do give us receipts. So we do.
Great. Okay, good. Yeah.
Yeah. Every organization give us receipts. Yep.
Great. Yeah. I mean, because that's the trick, is getting that. Are you using an accounting system right now to like record?
Yeah. So when they give us receipts, I do have an accountant. So they do put it as in that. I just didn't know, as far as when you're getting these grants and they're saying, estimate your prior year expenses. I didn't know if that would be cheating if you're using your incline receipts versus the funding.
Nope. And I think you just identify them that way, that they're, non-cash, right? That's what they are. They're non-cash resources. So, you can call them out and give them value, but you're in the business of that. So not talking about that would totally not be telling the whole story about what you're doing. So that's absolutely true. We're going to talk about some resources available to this community at the end too. And this might be a great use of our financial helpline, which is an email you can send about specific questions and get some support on that. Does that answer at least?
Yes, thank you so much.
Okay, cool. Great questions. Cool. So the other places to look, are we telling those hard stories as well as our wins? Both are really important. There's different ways that we might do that. So like variance reports or talking about our challenges, the way we message stuff to the board, the way we message stuff to the staff. Not all financial oversight has to be numbers. Much of it can be words. And then finally, does the organization have a solid set of processes and policies around financial activities? Are staff trained in both the how and the why of compliance ultimately? And so this includes some mysterious things called internal controls. If you've been through an audit, they look at all of this. Do we have trained and qualified accounting staff? That doesn't always mean like throwing out the old staff and bringing in new. It sometimes means sending our accounting staff to trainings as the organization grows. The needs, the like skill set of the accounting staff needs to grow, and we can help grow that. And then clear and accessible policies and procedures, so that the internal controls are kind of like the secret manual that tells how we make sure fraud's not being committed. Whereas the policies and procedures are sort of the public facing, staff facing ways that we handle different things and their part and responsibility in different kinds of financial transactions. So the great thing about all these areas is there's tons of resources online and that you can use to model your own on. Accountants can help, your CPA firm can help, peer organizations can help. This is an area where people are very generous in sharing, in my experience. And they don't have to be perfect, and they can be developed as you go. And then, is the organization compliant with funding guidelines, filing requirements, etc.? So if you're the leader and you're not really involved in the day-to-day, how are you, developing a mechanism so that you can feel comfortable that like, yeah, that stuff's getting done. I've got this list of stuff I know: renew the business license, file the 990, and I have a check-in that I'm using on a regular basis to make sure those are happening, and I never have to wake up at 3 a.m. and wonder if that got handled. All right, let's take a look at, we have developed as part of this pilot project, this financial oversight checklist that has sort of groups of questions that you can ask yourself or have your other staff ask themselves. Kind of go through here and mark whether this is something that, hey, this really is a red flag, needs attention right away. Yellow maybe needs a little bit of work. Green, just knocking it out of the park. Purple, I have no idea. And then a space to create an action plan. I'll just actually don't need to go to the Excel for this because you can see what it looks like. We'll send you a PDF of all the samples that I show, and then you are also welcome to reach out to me if you want the actual Excel spreadsheet because you prefer Excel. I can send you that too. Any questions on this before I move on to sort of we'll kind of wrap up this section on main financial oversight, and we're going to get into financial statements. You're welcome to jump in. Someone said the checklist is great. Thank you. All right. All right. So it's Amber asked, who's trained in using the checklist, just staff or board members too? So I think the checklist, depending on the size of your org and how deeply you want the board leaned into this part of your work, that this is a checklist designed for anyone really. And it might be a tool that you provide your board and say, hey board, you've been asking a lot about, are we doing enough financial oversight? So, we'd love for you to partner with us as we look at all of these things. I think it's a great internal document too, to think through, do we have what I need? So I think the checklist, I developed the checklist with a non-finance leader in the organization in mind, but the finance folks in your organization will definitely be able to help fill it out. Great question. So as you're looking at all of that, it can feel overwhelming to think about, all that we have left to do, aside from all of the great programmatic and purpose-driven work that we're doing too. But, this is a constant process and no organization is perfect. Every organization has room to grow. So my experience is that most orgs are somewhere sort of on the spectrum of in a different point in their journey, ultimately. And what I would encourage folks to focus on is like, what are the top priorities? Not how do we fix everything? And really focus on like, what's important for the next year or for the next budget cycle or for the next strategic planning period. And I make my top lists by thinking about what is the one thing I could take care of that would allow me to sleep more consistent hours at night and not worry and focus on the things there. So the three places I have here are getting started. You know, oftentimes when our purposes start as really grassroots purposes, you know, putting in that infrastructure isn't something that happens until, you know, after we kind of get our programmatic hypotheses tested in the world. So it's great getting started. Growing org, you know, hey, a lot of orgs got a lot of funding in the last couple of years. Now is a great time to start really focusing on the financial oversight for that. And then we may find ourselves in that financial oversight gold medal area where we really feel like this is handled and we're able to confidently look forward, handle issues as they come up. And we've really built a culture of transparency and accountability. And the board is happy about this part of the world. So we're going to put up a poll. Caroline, can you put up the poll for, yeah, and we would love to hear from you. Remember, this is anonymous, about where you feel like your organization is getting started, growing org, or financial oversight gold medal. And I know Sarah, were you going to share maybe a couple thoughts on this?
Yeah, definitely. Welcome again to the folks who might have joined into the workshop just a little bit later. We're so glad that you're here, especially because finance is so important to making sure that an organization can do the important things that it's committed to do in community, and it also can be super intimidating, right? And so for those of you who don't, I haven't had the chance to meet yet, I am the capacity building consultant for communities of opportunity, but I also in the past have been an executive director a couple of times and a development director, and worked in programs, and all of those things, right, get impacted by finance at the end of the day. What's happening with the resources, cash resources and non-cash, that allow us to do our work. And so I just want to say that, you know, getting started in some ways, I think, is a great place to be, in part because sometimes when we're in an organization that has been doing things for a long time a certain way, and maybe things have evolved where that system no longer keeps up or aligns well with the current operations, it's actually helpful to be able to have a clean slate that comes along with getting started or starting over. So I just want to say that there's no, I think when looking at this kind of financial oversight journey, there's no value placed on being in one place more than the other. It's just about figuring out and getting clear for ourselves, where are we, right? So we can figure out how to identify those priorities that Amy talked about before. And anytime that I've been in a position where I've had responsibility for needing to exercise financial oversight and make decisions that really impact the work that we do in community, it's been so important to continue to deepen my learning and ask questions around what is the financial state of the organization? How stable are we? Where are our income? Where's our income coming from? And, you know, what are our expenses? How do we pay our people if we have paid staff? What do we need in order to do the work? So I just want to encourage folks to keep sharing their questions and experiences, and to thank you as well for being willing to share what you've learned, share what you're hoping to learn, and all of us being in this learning journey together.
Thanks, Sarah. And Caroline, did you share the results of the poll? Looks like most folks are in the growing org category, which is cool, and that makes sense. And love that there are some folks in the gold medal category, and excited for the folks that are just getting started. To Sarah's point, sometimes it can be easier to build from scratch than to go and fix systems that aren't supporting you anymore. So thanks for sharing that. I appreciate that. One more thing I wanted to say about this too is that it can take about a year to start seeing a change in the way folks are showing up in the conversation about good financial oversight and storytelling. Just like fundraising, like it takes a while for change to, you know, for us to reap sort of what we sow in this area. All right. We are moving in. Okay, I think everybody needs to like shake out their financial oversight thoughts, because we're going to dive into financial statements. And I also teach at Seattle U, I teach financial management. And so I have a lot of experience teaching financial statements to folks. And I know it might seem like a dreary subject, but really it's so cool when you start to figure out and learn how to read financial statements better. So for those of you that this is review, you can just sit back and relax. And for the rest of you, let's just start looking at some financial statements. Oh, we've got another poll. Caroline, will you put up our second poll so we can gauge how comfortable folks are with reading financial statements? And also, I know Sarah just mentioned it, really figuring it out, really figuring out like where your money's coming from and where it's going. Sarah, did you have anything else? I know that you've walked into several scenarios where you've had to get a handle on things fairly quickly. Any other anecdotes you want to share about that or thoughts?
That's a lot of anecdotes about walking into situations that turned out a little bit different than I expected. I mean, I'm really excited about this next section about financial statements. I think because honestly, I was super intimidated by finance and by the financial statements that were, plopped down on my desk when I stepped in as an executive director for the first time. One of the situations I think I can share while folks are filling out the poll is that when I was the executive director of NAC, which is the Nonprofit Assistance Center, which was the first BIPOC led capacity building entity in this region, first day I came in, met with the board president, and had a stack of financial statements and reports put on my desk, and found out that we only had 2 months of operating expenses left, essentially, mostly for payroll, and that we were also $80,000 in debt because the recession had really cut the organization off at the knees. And being able to learn how to read and understand those financial statements, it's like what Amy said earlier about, even when it's the hard stories or the stories that feel kind of like ugly numbers and stories to look at, they actually are probably in some ways the richest ones, because looking at it and understanding where we were allowed me to think about, okay, so what do we need to do? What do we need to do to get ourselves into a better, more stable position? What are the most important decisions that we have to make? What additional information do I have to find? And also, how did we get into the situation, and how can I make sure it doesn't happen again? Right. And those are things that seriously financial statements can help you to discover once you really learn how to make sense of them. And so it continues to be something that I personally, want to keep on honing my skills around. And I love especially working on it with Amy, because she just gets so excited about them and makes it, something that I know we can all figure out how to do, even when we live within a society and a system that has made it, particularly for people of color, an inaccessible, daunting, high barrier area of work and expertise. But it's actually, if anything, people of color know how to manage resources and make the most out of a situation, even when the barriers are against us. And that's something I think is completely translatable and applicable to finance. It's just figuring out what specific, knowledge and skills we need to hone, and then make sure that, we can understand our own stories and then be the ones telling them.
Yay. Thank you, Sarah. That was so beautifully put. Yes, one of the ways that finance and accounting, the profession, keeps folks out of the conversation is by making the language completely ununderstandable for the layperson. And so that's part of what we're going to do when we look at financial statements, is we're going to look at all the phrases and language that we use and talk about what it means in the real world. And so if you have questions, if I use jargon that you don't understand, please put a question in the chat box or just come off mute and ask. what it is, because I've been steeped in it for a long time and I can't always see it, the water that I'm in, the weird, jargony, inaccessible language water. All right, so financial statements tell a story. We got to figure out what story it's telling. And so I like to approach reading financial statements thinking about what are the questions that this statement can answer for me. So that's the frame we're going to bring. We're going to do like a skimming of this topic today. I hope you will actually take some solid things with you. It looks like most of you fall in the not comfortable and somewhat comfortable category. There's 5 of you that feel very comfortable, so feel free to dive in or correct me if I get something wrong. And, you know, if you want to teach this workshop, let me know. Okay, so we're starting with the questions. Overall, reading financial statements, thinking about why do we care about financial statements? It's good to center us in that why, because it can get frustrating. So coming back to the essential why of financial statements, you know, these are some of the very important things they can answer for us. How much money do we have? Are we spending more money than we're bringing in? How much do we owe to people in the next year? Do we have any savings? And how are we doing compared to budget? So we're going to focus on those 5 very basic questions, universal questions. And then we're going to take a look at which statements answer them for us and how we get to those answers. All right. Oops. Fast forward. Types of reports. Okay, so let's take a look at there are so many different financial reports. And we're going to be taking a look at the 3 on the left here. Let me get my box out here. We're going to take a look at some of the box statements today and reports. So I've just categorized these into 4 categories, just so I can say all the names that may sound familiar to you, or you may be very intimately familiar with. The standard financial statements that might be part of your audited financial statements. They also show up in various ways on the 990, the tax report that C3s are required to file and C4s. And those include 2 statements we're going to talk about today: the income statement or the statement of activities, and the balance sheet or the statement of position. There's a couple other statements that are in there too. We're not going to talk about them today. These are the most important ones. They can tell us most of the story. Other financial reports we might have internally inside of our organizations are departmental profit and loss statements. So we might look at program and fundraising and admin. We also might have some internal comparison to budget or comparison to last year to look at trends. And dashboards, we might have like a very cool, colorful, lots of pictures, org-wide dashboard that helps staff see the big picture in their work, in how it shows up in those numbers. And we might have departmental dashboards that help drive teams of folks towards goals and celebrate their wins and flag things that aren't maybe going the way we predicted. Other stuff outside of today's conversation are things like the audited financials, 990s, and grant and funding reports. And I'm always happy. There are other places you can get support on those that we'll talk about at the end. Okay, so we're going to start with financial statements. And we're going to start with the income statement. Any questions so far? Cool. So the income statement, I've got kind of a sample, overly simplistic income statement sample here for an organization called LEAD that's made up. These statements have a couple of different names. The income statement can also be called the profit and loss. Income just means telling us how much money we made. Profit and loss, same thing. The very technical term for a nonprofit's income statement is the statement of financial activities. So I try and remember that activities are about earning money and spending money, and that the statement of financial activities, that's how I know that it's the income statement. And that's what it'll be called in your audit. And auditors will talk about it that way. Most other folks will use those first 2 terms, interchangeable. So what's in it is basically what's happened over a certain period of time around what we brought in and what we spent. And it might be a month, and it might be a quarter, it might be a year. The main questions that the income statement answers are that we talked about are we spending more money than we're bringing in, and are we on budget? So it's going to talk about those monthly activities, those annual activities that we do kind of over and over again to do our mission, you know, fulfill our purpose, and then also pay our folks, pay other folks. There's essentially these two main sections of an income statement. Sometimes they'll get more complicated, but mainly it's going to be this collection of revenue and this collection of expenses. Revenue, income, interchangeable, means the money we brought in. Expenses, the money that goes out. We will often organize our income statement by type of revenue. So we might have a section on contributed revenue, which just means all of our fundraising and grant money. And we might have a section called earned revenue. This one doesn't. We'll go to another example in a minute. And then interest income, sort of the other income categories. And then expenses on audited financials are always rolled up into these big three categories. Just kind of standard program expenses, management in general, which is where I live most of the time, and then fundraising. Yeah, so that's basically it. It seems simple. Your statement might look different, but I bet it falls essentially into those categories. And then this number at the bottom is just the difference between those two sections. And that tells us if we made money or not in that period. We did just kind of go over this, but a little bit more on the revenue and expenses. It's going to be stuff like your grant revenue, and that might mean we got a big award we got a letter for, or it might mean we build the city based on our contract. Here's this month or this year's set of revenue for that. It can include fundraising events and other kinds of earned revenue or fundraising revenue. And then expenses, biggest one for most of us, salary and benefits. And then it'll have our operating costs like rent, utilities, any supplies, programmatic supplies, direct program expenses, things like that. All right, so a couple of things about how they're organized. And this is pretty consistent around everybody. So revenues are generally categorized so that you can see what you raised by category, and the bigger categories are at the top. So like interest income, small, so it's usually at the bottom. And so you will either lead with your government contracts or grants, or you might lead with fundraising, but it's usually going to have those big numbers at the top. And then expenses are summarized into those three categories we talked about. And again, they're usually same order: program expenses first, because that's why we all show up every day. And then fundraising and admin will be interchangeable. If you see a more detailed income statement, you're always going to see salaries as the top line, almost always, or direct program costs. Again, you know, we lead with the big stuff and we lead with the important stuff. And then the difference is our profit or loss. All right, so let's take a look at another example. Let me pull it up here. Workshop materials. There it is. I'm going to move some faces. Here we go. So this is an example of a slightly more detailed income statement. It's got some comparisons here to budget. That's often a quality that you will see on an income statement. It's nice to see it compared to like last year or budget, so you can look at a trend or put it in context of something. Otherwise, it's just numbers. This particular income statement is showing us the difference between the budget and the percent difference. And so we're going to get answers to some of our questions. If we look at the stuff in orange on this one of our questions was, are we making more than we spend? And the answer for 2021 is, nope, because it's a negative number. We aren't making as much as we're spending. So we've got the answer to that question. And then how are we doing compared to our budget? Well, we actually budgeted to lose $63,000 in that section. So actually we're ahead of budget. And so that's good news. And that's the answer to another one of our questions. I put some extra ratios that you might calculate for advanced students in the right-hand side here. We won't go through them today. I'm happy to go through them with you individually, and happy to send you the spreadsheet if you want to play around with calculating them yourself. Income statements are most often done quarterly. for smaller organizations, and for larger organizations, probably done monthly. It really depends on your reporting cycle for your board of directors and how often they want to see it. That's usually the number one driving factor. Let's see. All right, let's go back to the PowerPoint. There it is, the show. Back to the show. All right, we're going to move into our second financial statement. If you need to like scream at the top of your lungs, you're all on mute, so you can do that. Just the statement number 2, and then we're going to move on to something else. Balance sheet. Okay, so this is a great statement, probably not as often used as the income statement, because obviously we use that income statement to figure out what's going on and do we have to make any changes. Balance sheet is more of like a point in time kind of report. So it also has multiple names. It's called the balance sheet, and it's also called the statement of financial position. That's its official nonprofit title, used on your audited financial statements and by auditors, sometimes board members, but balance sheet is what you'll know by mostly. It tells the story of where we are at any point in time. So it's as of a date. The statement of activities was a period of time, balance sheets as of one point in time. And they usually come out together at the end of a period. So we might see, you know, what was the story for the first quarter? And then at the very end of the first quarter, what did our balance sheet look like? And the main questions that it answers that we asked at the front of the section are, how much cash do we have? How much do we owe in the next year? And do we have some savings? All really important if we're running the organization or if we're the person that they go to figure out if we have enough money to do things. These are questions we want to be able to answer. Okay. And I have lost the chat box. Let me open this again. Okay, cool. All right. So again, our fake organization lead has very simple financial statements. So very similar to all of us though, whether simple or complex, we have basically two sections, 3 sections on our balance sheet. First is assets, and that's stuff we own. That's all it means. Things like cash, things like receivables, which are just invoices we send to people who owe us money. Might be a little bit of inventory if we have a lot of stuff, like if we inventory office supplies is common, but maybe it's t-shirts that we give to the youth we work with. We don't have to inventory stuff, but if it has a lot of value, it helps to not have expenses hit all in one period. So we use that inventory. And then things like prepaids and deposits, which are really just accounting terms for when we have to pay things that have to do with a different period of time. Cool. And then liabilities are the second main section on the balance sheet. So we've got our assets, all the stuff we own. Liabilities is everything that we owe other people. So that might be, we owe vendors for electricity, we owe staff for wages we haven't paid yet. Other miscellaneous accrued expenses is a fancy accounting term for stuff we owe people. And then any debt we have. So debt would be different than payables because debt really specifically refers to things like lines of credit with your bank, mortgages, notes that you might have signed with folks, those kind of formal loan instruments. Both asset and liability account sections are sorted into like current section, which is everything that's either available to us in the next year or due to people in the next year, and then older stuff. So you'll see fixed assets is broken out from current assets. Fixed assets are those things like, if we're lucky enough to own a building, it would be there, or furniture or vans fall into that category. And then the third section is like the difference between those two. Assets minus liabilities. So what we own minus what we owe is our equity or our net worth or our net assets. They all refer to the same thing. Because we're nonprofits, we record our equity in categories of unrestricted and restricted. Unrestricted means this is the accumulation of all of the net income we've had over time that we can do whatever we want with. And restricted just means that the donors put some strings on those. And so they're either restricted over time or for a particular purpose. Not everyone does their accounting in the equity section like this. Once you start having audits, you will be required to. It is the hardest part of nonprofit accounting, is figuring out restricted and unrestricted and grant stuff. So it's definitely something to get outside help with. Okay, one more, and we'll look at a little bit more complicated balance sheet and figure out how we get answers to our questions. So balance sheets are organized in that, current, long-term. The most liquid assets are first, and liquid just means how quickly do they become cash. So I like to think about it like ice takes a little bit to melt and make a liquid. Cash is already cash. So that's the way the balance sheet's organized. Fixed assets at the bottom, because it would take the longest to turn those into cash because they're big and they're probably old. And we'd have to sell them on Craigslist. And then liabilities, those are listed in the order that they're due to people. So the stuff that's due soonest is at the top. The stuff we have the longest time to pay back is at the bottom. So the long-term loan, not stuff that's due beyond the first year. All right, and then we're gonna look at another balance sheet. Oh, that's not the right button. Here we go. All right, balance sheet. Leave the chat. So this is how I like to see balance sheets, which is a year-over-year comparison, because that really tells you a lot. It can tell you, how much your cash changed year to year, how much your equity is growing year to year. Balance sheets without a comparison, another one of those hard to tell the context. No one I know of does balance sheet budgets. I've done them before, but boards don't really need them. You need those income statement budgets. So the best comparison is to compare to a prior period. We had a couple questions on this. One was how much cash do we have? Super easy to find that on the balance sheet. It's the top line, always, always, always. And here we see, it looks like we've got some cash. That's awesome. And we have more than we did a year ago. So that's really great news. The second thing, one of the other questions was, do we have any savings? And the place you might see savings might be up right under cash. Sometimes it's combined with cash. Oftentimes, if it's a savings account the board has asked us to set up, it'll be sort of outside of current assets as an other asset, and it'll refer to the fact that it's a board restricted reserve. So we do have some savings, same as we had last year. Awesome. And then we wanted to know, what do we owe in the next year? This is a great thing to look at compared to how much cash we have, right? Because then we get a feeling for do we have enough money to pay our bills? In fact, there's ratios that you can calculate to figure how many times over can I pay my current bills. So we look at this current liabilities. That's the amount we owe in the next year, $83,000. Wow, compared to our cash balance, we could pay that 7 times over. So we're in pretty good shape. This is a nice, healthy difference between cash and liabilities. So we're feeling pretty good. All right, so we answered our 5 questions just looking at those statements. You're going to get this PowerPoint so you could go back home and figure out how to answer those questions based on your own statements. All right. Let's see. We're back. Any questions? Let's talk about financial statements. I'm sure you've got questions. Any insights or fun financial statement stories anyone wants to share? Any revelations? You don't have to be shy. Or you can be. Okay. We will move right along here. So the third area we're going to talk about today is reporting to different stakeholders and talking about what they look for and what kinds of reports might be great to develop to make stakeholders happy. And so different groups of people want different information. And financial information can be overwhelming. So my goal with reporting is always to give people enough information that answers their questions, but not so much that the message is lost in the details. And then importantly, tell people how to read the information and the reports. And that might even look like, sometimes I even embed instructions in the reports that say, this means this. So we can look at we're going to look at some examples, but let's talk about groups of stakeholders. And if I'm missing any, or you want to interject any, please do jump in. So a really key group of stakeholders when we're talking about financial reports, I think, is the management staff, because when we're telling our story accurately and timely, we can actually use financial information to make operational decisions as we go. And the more we bring in a bigger group of managers to help us make those decisions, the lighter the load is for everybody and the more collaborative the work is. So developing reports, that income statement that has 3 lines of expenses, that's not going to help your team manage their work, right? We need a different kind of report to help managers manage their workload. All staff are interested too, that culture of transparency. All staff might not necessarily be making financial decisions versus budget all the time, but they sure can benefit from understanding if you're in like a boom or bust time, or is it a belt tightening era, or is it a let's invest, we've got some money time. It also goes to build that culture of transparency and let staff feel like they're part of that important conversation of the financial story. And dashboards are a great way to bring staff along without burying them in complicated reports. Board of directors, they want to see a lot of it, right? Financial statements are perfect for the board of directors. They're not necessarily making just-in-time decisions, so they can take a little bit longer. Dashboards are a really great way to get the board focused on what you would like them to be focused on. Boards are so amazing, right? They bring so much time and talent and treasure, and we want them focused on the things they can really move the needle on, where we can really leverage their skill set. We don't want them trying to balance our balance sheet for us necessarily, unless that's the skill they bring. And so using dashboards as a way to summarize financial data and focus their immense great talent in the direction we want to focus it can be really useful. And we'll look at an example of that. And then 990s and audited financials, that ticks some very important governance boxes to have your board look at those. So it's a great idea. Funders want to see audited financials, internal financial statements. They might even want to see some modeling and forecasts moving forward, which we will be talking about in 3 weeks. So come back for that conversation. And then donors, they don't really need to see a ton of financial information. They look at your annual report. We almost always include some kind of financial information in our annual report, although that is entirely up to us about what we include. And some donors might want to see some strategic forward-looking plans and models if you were asking them to invest significantly. All right, so let's take a look at how some different reports might look, just to give you some ideas. And would love to hear from you about what's working for you or problems that you're trying to solve with reporting and communication right now. Whoop. Okay, these are some old, I mentioned that I worked at Fair Start for many years. I was a big fan of trying to put color on reports, so mine are always colorful. And these were just a few of the different kinds of ways we slice the data. This was a departmental report, so this was really for a big picture look at like how are the different departments and functions contributing to the overall investment of the organization, and where, which areas drive revenue and how much are those revenue areas. And a little simple compared to budget difference. The truth of most of our accounting softwares is that the reporting functionality is sadly limited. And so it does sometimes mean putting some cool stuff into Excel to have a really meaningful report for internal staff. This is another, this was our Monopoly card, a little bit more detail, dives into departments at a little bit more micro level. So splits out training into our adult and our youth program, includes a little bit more specific information about those different kinds of expense areas. So this is where managers could really use this kind of reporting to figure out where salaries were compared to budget, and how they were doing with revenue. and then look at their piece as part of the total. And then finally, my favorite kind of reporting is dashboard reporting. Once you've got your financial statements in a place where you feel like, yes, they make sense, it's a really great time to think about how do we slice that data. Dashboards are a great place where we can add charts and graphs and pictures, which always pull people in and get them a little bit more relaxed about the numbers. It's a way we can start to incorporate non-financial metrics in the story we're telling. So we can't find a way to get mission or purpose or outcomes or outputs on our income statement, but this is a way where we can bring those things together so we can really put our financials in context of the work we're trying to do in the world. So this is a really common way to do dashboards, to use these green, yellow, and red light stoplights. Basically, you're going even further than making the information easy. You're using colors to tell people whether they should freak out or be calm about certain numbers. And this is really useful for managers, can be really useful for the executive director, if the accounting person's creating this, and it's really useful for the board of directors, especially if they're involved in deciding what's better than, what's green and what's yellow and what's red. So in this dashboard, we start with our impact, which I think is a really important part of creating dashboards. People are way more interested in the work we're doing than they are in the financial component of it, most folks. And so framing financial storytelling inside the bigger purpose, I think, is always a way to pull people into the story. So this starts with an assessment of our impact by the numbers. We've got a little visual here. It's very simple to create. Excel is very smart about taking little tables of data and suggesting different graphs for you. Another great thing to ask for help for on the financial helpline. I really enjoy making graphs. Then we're looking at our resources. So that's the money coming in, and we've got some goals and some actuals and some green and yellow lights. So some stuff's on track or ahead and some stuff's a little bit behind. And then one of the great things about, dashboards are really a way to take control of the narrative. And it is really a way to shine a spotlight on the things that are important to us. And I know that some of you are working very hard on this. One of the things that is a challenge in the nonprofit sector is our salaries are significantly below market. And it's totally an issue of racism and white supremacy. Like it's a social justice issue, we all know, to get our wages higher. And so this is an example where, if we're trying to shift our board or folks to start thinking about this as a goal to improve salaries, improve retention, start paying people living wages, instead of having them relate to it as a dollar amount that's higher than last year and a negative, a dashboard's a really powerful place to say, hey, here's our people. We are paying them on average 64,000. We want to pay them 70,000. That is our goal. I have a visual showing you we are not where we need to be yet. And I'm calling this yellow because I need to spend more money here. So I think it's a great example of how dashboards can be aligned with our values and get people focused on the stuff we want them to focus on. Dashboards, revolutionary, activists.
Amy, would you share the month's cash on hand? Explain that part of the dashboard.
Yeah, absolutely. Oh, and then Rebecca. Oh, Rebecca raised her hand. I would love to hear from Rebecca. Where is that?
Right at the bottom.
There it is. Sorry. I'm so excited on my soapbox. Thank you, Sarah. Okay, other financial metrics. So month's cash on hand is something that folks ask for all the time. And it's really simple to calculate. You just take your average monthly expenses and then divide it by the amount of cash you have. And this is, if you don't have a rainy day fund or a reserve, you can just say, hey, in my checking account, I've got 2 months worth of expenses on hand. The handout on the income statement actually has the formula for doing that in there, so you can use that. And then can do this little thing. So here we've said, hey, we want to have 4 months cash on hand because that makes us feel comfortable. We only have 2, so we've got it as a red flag. We need another month in there. The industry standard is 3 to 6 months. That's what people look for. I think every organization's got to decide what makes sense for them though. Rebecca, did you want to say something or have a question?
Yeah, I've more of wanted to, it's like a question / ask for advice type thing. I love that you're showing these different ways to show income and all of that. Our P&L, I love how you did yours with the different programs and everything.
Mhm.
I would love ours to look like that. It's just our budgets we have so many and they're so big, and P&L ends up taking me a couple days now. It's such a project. And
Yeah.
I was wondering if you had any advice for how to set that up for just like the general person, no matter how much or how small their budget is.
Yeah, many of us, I think, are probably using QuickBooks. I know you're using QuickBooks, Rebecca, and so you can run, you can set up your QuickBooks to run program level and essentially department level P&Ls. But what I've created here, I created outside the accounting system in Excel.
Right.
So Excel can be a really powerful bridge tool for us between our accounting software and the reports of our dreams. And so I would highly recommend either getting someone who knows Excel, who can write some good report templates for you, or taking some Excel training classes, because essentially, the backbone of all of this accounting data is the trial balance, which we haven't even talked about today, but it is essentially a list of all the accounts and all the amounts, right?
Mm-hmm.
And using that trial balance over time, you can build cool Excel workbooks that can pump that out automatically using things like VLOOKUP or some magical formulas in Excel. There's lots of Excel trainings all over there, all over the place for sure.
Okay.
And I mean, some are better than others. I think I don't know if 501 Commons offers Excel training. I think that there's probably a lot of free resources online that are just as good, unless you find something specifically around like nonprofit reports. That's something you can, we have some help on the helpline that's, I would say, an intermediary, that's me, level Excel person, and I'm happy to help build some basic stuff and do some training too.
Okay. Yeah, because I've been learning as I go, but it gets overwhelming at times, and yours is just so pretty. And I would like it to be like that someday.
Mine is not very complex, but I'm telling you, adding a little bit of color makes it, and paying attention to fonts really does the info for the helpline. We're going to report it at the end for sure too. We'll share. Yeah, great. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thanks, Rebecca. Other questions? I'm going to talk a little bit more about go away from the sample dashboard and just talk about philosophy of dashboard. And then I think we're going to do a little breakout session. Thank you, CC. North Seattle Community College has Excel courses. They're not nonprofit specific though. And what I would recommend if you're going to take a full-on Excel course is come with your own problem, right? Like Rebecca was just talking about, come with the project that you want to succeed on, because those Excel classes are great, but when you learn them, like how to make a spreadsheet of my record collection, or how to figure out how the business makes money on widgets, it can be hard to come back and translate that to your own work unless you're kind of bringing your problem along for the ride. That was my experience when I first started taking Excel classes. And trial and error. And YouTube has all of the answers for every problem that you have on Excel. That's where I learn these days. Okay. So let's take a look over here. Back at our show. Here's the show. Okay. So I actually meant to do this slide before we looked at the example, but oops, we'll talk about the theory after the example. And I think we might have a little bit of time to do a little bit of a breakout. So as I mentioned, I feel like dashboards are are potentially revolutionary for our financial reporting. It allows us to slice it the way we want to, tie it to our values, get people focused on what we want them to be paying attention to. I think it's really important when we start dashboards and our storytelling with finances that we start with our impact, the why, and tie it back to our purpose, our mission, the big story arc. And that might be outputs and outcomes, it might be cost per outcome. I was working with a group the other day that was like, could we put anecdotes in that section? Like, heck yeah, you can do anything you want. There's no rules around dashboards. And so it's an opportunity to share like a purpose story or, you know, something less number oriented. Then I think the next thing you can focus on, and this is all just a suggestion, is resources. So we want to do this big work in the world. We're doing this big work in the world. You know, what is the resource that's running the engine? So maybe that's how much money we're bringing in. Maybe it's how many volunteer hours are fueling our work. And for sure it is our staff. How are the humans doing the work? And what is important about thinking about the human piece of our work, which is, you know, are staff satisfied? Are they making a living wage? Are we retaining them? Are we investing in their professional development? All ways to talk about the salary expense line that hangs so heavy on all of our income statements, and people spend a lot of time looking at from a negative perspective, turning that and really showing the value of our staff and front and centering their work. And then the what, the small print at the bottom, you know, what does it cost to be doing what we're doing? That might be performance to budget or our total net assets. It might be our cash, days cash on hand, months cash on hand, some of the other little ratios you can run, and then maybe looking towards the future. What are we forecasting for the end of the year? What does next year look like? We can think of different ways to represent that. I do this exercise when I teach this in class, where I bring construction paper and Post-it notes and glue and ribbons and markers, and it's an art project really to think about. Don't worry about the numbers and how you're going to get them, but what's the story that you want to tell? I've gotten some really great, pretty cool projects over the years on that. Anybody have a dashboard they're super proud of, or like components that they've included in their dashboard that's been good or a game changer, or you felt really happy about? I know some of you have very cool reports. All right, that's okay. So we're gonna do some breakout rooms for about 10 minutes. And I've got a couple questions for you to contemplate that I will put into the chat. Or maybe Caroline, could you type these into the chat for me? That would be awesome. This is impromptu we're doing because we have time to do it. Then first of all, thinking back to that financial oversight and thinking about where you are on that spectrum, would love for you to go into breakout groups and talk about one or two areas where, just thinking through today, that you're like, yeah, you know what, that's going to be on my list of some financial oversight improvements I'd like to make. And then the second question I would love to have you contemplate is, if you're thinking about an organizational dashboard for yourself, for your organization or your department or your program, what are one or two key things that, doesn't matter how we get to there, you don't worry about the how, but just like, what would you like to see on a dashboard that's a little bit non-traditional? So that's the two questions. What are a couple of things on financial oversight? And what are one or two things that you'd like to see on your organizational dashboard? And we'll have a little bit of time to share, but mostly this is an opportunity for you guys to talk with each other. So Caroline, can you break folks into groups of, let's do groups of 3.
And before you actually,
yes.
I'm sorry, Amy, go ahead.
No, go ahead.
I was just going to say, before we actually send you all into the groups, Amy, would you mind bringing up that dashboard example again? Because I think it's helpful to actually see what one could look like, and it might inspire folks in terms of, you know, how you could design yours. And as Amy's bringing that back up, I'll just quickly share some of the ways that I've used dashboards in the past. One of which is, would you actually flip to the P&L summary by department for a second. So this is just part of my story, in that when I've been an executive director in the past and working with the board, partly because the board had to take on a much more comprehensive finance function while they were without an ED. When I stepped in, there was a lot of our board meeting that was just spent pretty much going over that blue and yellow column at the end. Why are things different? The variances from where we are and what we had budgeted, you know, down to like, why are we spending more on postage or on paper than we had anticipated? And it all comes from a very good place, right? But it wasn't actually the best use of the board's time at this particular stage. And so, you know, we want to be responsible and diligent about making sure that our board, as one of those stakeholder audiences, has access to the information. But in terms of thinking about where they can be most effective, it's actually more on that dashboard level, right? And so if we flip back to the dashboard, like on the dashboard that I designed to work with my board at the time, we were also tracking, you know, how many organizations are we serving this month, and how many had we set a goal of serving, right? How many of those organizations are coming from communities of color? We were tracking things around staffing, right? So we needed to staff up. So how many staff did we have now? Where were we trying to get to? Volunteers we tracked on our dashboard, even board members. So this is something that I don't see on dashboards all the time, and not everyone needs it. But for organizations where, you know, you're actually trying to grow your board, or sometimes you're trying to shift the composition of your board. Some folks have had board members who've been on their organization's board for, you know, a decade or more, and you actually are needing an infusion of new kind of experiences and perspectives. And so I had, when we had a board development goal around kind of transitioning our board, you know, I put a dashboard metric on there around how many of our board members were over their term limits, how many were coming up on their term, how many had just started on their term, and that helped us better gauge where we were at in terms of our progress towards that goal, right? And so there's a whole lot of different ways that I think we can use dashboards based on the goals that we're trying to achieve for our organizations, and then how that specific audience viewing that particular dashboard, whether it's your board or your staff, like that shifts the content. So I'm hoping that, you know, in this breakout, while you all have a little bit of time to really just get creative and brainstorm together, you know, think about what would be the most useful thing for me to be spending this time talking to this particular subset of organization, staff, or board, or donors about, and then therefore, what would I want to have on that dashboard, right? So I just wanted to share that in case that helped to spur any thinking.
Thank you, Sarah. That was great. All right, we'll break you up into groups of about 3, and the questions are in the chat to contemplate, and we'll see you back here in, we're going to do 8 minutes. See you soon. Thanks, Caroline. Yay. Just Sarah's face.
And if it's helpful, you all and I can go bump into some of the rooms and just see how folks are doing.
Yeah. Great. Hello, welcome back. Thank you for breaking out. Oh, not everyone's quite back yet.
Nope, we've still got some more folks coming back.
Okay. I always want to hum the Jeopardy theme a little bit. Well, sometimes I do that for my financial management classes, because you gotta do the laughs when you can.
It's true.
Yeah, so when everyone comes back, we're moving into Q&A, and that's exciting. After we talk. Hello, Emily. Cece, I'm seeing familiar faces. I want to greet all of you with this enthusiasm, but it's fun to see faces of people I have met and know. All right, do we have everyone back? Yeah, we do, woohoo! All right, well, thanks for breaking out and talking about those. I would love, just so I can hear your amazing voices, would love to have anyone share that wants to share if there was anything they got from a cohort peer, a breakout peer, that they were like, yes, this is gonna be life-changing. Anyone want to share? Gotta have at least one person.
Share really quickly.
Yeah, yay.
In our breakout room, Janae mentioned something right before we left about how important it is to actually invest and having someone do the finances in your organization. I know we have an outside person that's helping us with ours. And I think it can be such an expense, but just seeing that as like, that being an asset to actually have someone on the team that's doing that, that's dedicated to do that work, and how much that saves you time to do to focus on other areas of the organization is something that I want to bring back to my group, just, thinking long-term planning for us. So yeah, that was really important.
That's great. Great point.
And look like we're all kind of talking about the same thing, because that was one of the things we kind of lightly discussed also in our group, is that from the screens and the different things that Amy put up, it is really good to have somebody that this is what they do. They focus on this part. This is, you see how excited Amy is. It's amazing. That is for somebody that this is the type of work they do. And so, I think for me, it's just really being able to put people in the places, since we have been wearing all the hats and now we're growing, then now I want to go on and spend that funding to go on and bring somebody in here that they are just excited as Amy, and they can be able to do this work. And so one of my questions to my group, and the time had went out, is where do I go? Where do I find an actual accountant or somebody that actually would do this type of work for a nonprofit? Then that way my people won't have to focus on this right here, because this can be stressful if this is not where their gift is.
Exactly. What a great point. Excellent point. Yeah, and it can be hard finding good accounting staff. Hiring anyone right now is really challenging. And so, reaching out to each other, looking on LinkedIn, not waiting for people to look for work, inviting people from the for-profit sector into the nonprofit sector, bring all their mad Excel skills here to us. I think we do have to kind of get creative about it sometimes, but there are also, outsourced bookkeeping services and accounting services that you can use as well.
Maybe can I chime in as well on that?
Yes.
I'll just say that it's a great idea, I think, to bring in somebody, whether it's onto your staff or whether it is, again, as several folks have said, outsourcing it, to somebody who's doing it part-time, because sometimes it's not a full-time person that you actually need.
That's right.
Focusing just on your organization's finances, depending on how large, your budget and your operation is. But I will say that it can be hard to find somebody who, in particular, understands nonprofit finances or is willing to figure out how to set it up. And so I'll just say that, at the organizations I have been at that have been able to reach a place of financial stability, the accounting staff person is one of the highest paid people at the organization. And I'm just going to share that real truth, because if you're not expecting that, or if, which I wasn't always, I didn't realize just how much of a rarity in some ways it was to find somebody who, really had those skills and also, cared about the organization and its mission and was going to do that work. And so where sometimes boards can look at it and be like, why are we paying this one staff person so high? It really is because it's the one thing I didn't have to worry about at that organization that I shared about earlier, where we were in the hole. I had to worry about the money, but I did not have to worry about the person who was helping do the finances. And we had somehow held on to that person for just 10 hours a week for like a decade. it wasn't even a ton of time and I could have used more of his time. But the fact that I knew that even though we were in debt, that our books were accurate, that they were clean, that helped me sleep at night. Because at least I knew I wasn't looking at bad data, right? I could make the right decisions based off of looking at accurate data.
Yeah.
So I just want to be real with folks that, one, if you're thinking about, bringing on a person to do that in one way or another, definitely look for the right person who you can trust, who has the skills. Also recognize that it's something in the larger scheme of things that's probably going to be worth paying for, in a way that helps you to sustain that. Sometimes reaching out to board members for their connections, their networks, right, has been a helpful place as well, beyond the kind of general LinkedIn and posting it on the job boards and all of that. So I'll just share that piece. Jimmy, do you want to say anything about yours? I noticed that you chimed in on the chat about this experience.
Yeah, and I had shared a bit in the breakout room, just like what a big decision it felt like to make, to invest in this area of the organization versus maybe giving, we need more people to run programs and we need lots of things. And I was just kind of taking it on myself and assuming like this just needs to get done and we needed to invest elsewhere. But it was honestly the best choice. It has freed up my time in different ways considerably. And I do now sleep at night a lot better. Just totally a miracle that we found Cece, who is absolutely amazing. We decided to couple this role with being part finance and some operations. But just in all the research and everything that we put into creating this role, and even talking with our existing accounting team, which is also 3 other people that support, they were like, no, you need full-time. Like everybody was in agreement that like it's actually full-time. And Cece had the incredible joy of starting during an audit. And like ever since then, it's just been, there's always more than enough to do. So it has been like one of the best investments I feel like I've ever made. It's been totally worth it. And it has, Cece in that role has really increased the capacity of our organization wide, from like building systems that are supporting our grants trackings, and just the implications are so far reaching, even beyond just generating reports like this.
Yay, thanks, Jemay. And yay, Cece, so excited we get to have both of you on this workshop. Any other
thoughts, questions, ideas that came up in your conversations? Because this is one of the areas that we all have to deal with, right? You're here for a reason. So
right.
I think just being able to share some of those stories can be incredibly helpful to one another. Okay, well, I know that when we started the workshop and folks were introducing themselves, folks were sharing, one question or goal that they were hoping to address today. Is there any that are still kind of lingering out there that folks had questions about that perhaps weren't addressed? I know that, for instance, I think Kali from Vashon was talking about trying to figure out a way to set up systems to make it more accessible to staff. Some of you are also in the position of a lot of growth right now. I'm just curious, is there anything else that is on your mind that while we have each other here as resources, and we have Amy with her depth of experience that we can use this time for?
Question. Going off, yes, I'm Callie. Hi. I really appreciated this training. I don't know what we're calling it, but yes, I definitely feel like I learned a lot. And I'm wondering, in the packet that you're going to send, will it have those like dashboard examples? So we could potentially like plug in our own things
Yep.
or just get inspiration?
Yeah.
Because I know we talked about in our breakout room, like just spending the time to figure out how to do it is like really hard.
Yeah.
And then even just reflecting, right? Finding the space and time to reflect, like, what is our story? How do we communicate this story and this information to the whole team? If we aren't having that like big transparency, or people don't really get what the budget is, how can the dashboard further the goals rather than just be another thing for us to do, right? It shouldn't be another thing for us to do. It should be an actual tool that like serves us. So, but yeah, it's given me so much to think about. I really thank you, you and Sarah both for taking time to share your knowledge with us.
Yeah, it's a lot. And I think you got to decide which pieces you want to bite off. That's why the oversight checklist kind of gives you an opportunity to say this one and this one. And yes, the dashboard, that's why we're sending it out in Excel, because then everything's linked. So yeah, you could actually like plug in your own numbers and change the little headings, and also just use it as a, you know, as an idea on the format.
Thank you.
Yeah.
And for me, I know I've been doing a lot of talking, but I'm good at being able to say stuff maybe that people won't say or won't say. But I know for me, because there's so much funding that's coming down the pipeline, and a lot of times people don't feel comfortable of saying, you know, especially when you've been out here and haven't had to really work with funding like larger organizations, and then being a minority that you're being put into this big fishnet of pool of saying, hey, now we have funding and now we want you to start budgeting. We want you to start doing spreadsheets like this. And we want you to start, and when we haven't even got the research or information to even start the process. Yeah. And I guess I want to just be more even transparent to say, hey, you know, we know funding is coming down the line. We know millions of dollars is coming down the line. And we know people are saying, hey, your organization can be a part of that. But what we're not getting is the step-by-step process to get to that point. Like we see, you know, I think that a lot of times people don't realize that when you're out here in your outreach or organization, especially a minority organization, you haven't got the previous information or teaching on how to step into the world of you know, the spreadsheets, the budgeting, the different things. And so I have been looking at different grants that's coming down the pipeline, and they're not asking for a large too out of the rim budget, but they are saying, hey, we need to get what you've been doing on paper. And I think that's probably why a lot of times people don't really know, okay, do I say, hey, we're just starting this process, or what does that make me look like to say that? But I'm willing to say it. Like we have been doing this without having to really have a budget. And now we are starting from not having funding to now they're saying, we have a lot of funding for you. And it can be very overwhelming. And that's why probably many of us that is starting off is on this line to say, how do we start? How do we get? And I think, Sarah, you said the next meeting that we're going to have, you'll talk about for maybe more smaller organization, how do we transfer our incline, our resources of incline donations into making that look, putting it on a budget. Because though we do have these larger organizations, it's not like they're really saying to us, hey, let me tell you how to do it, right? We're not really getting, you know, nobody's really wanting to really give that information if they're larger, because they're doing their own work, right? But we got to have something that be able to hold our hand to get into that world.
Yeah. I think it's such an excellent point that you brought up. And I think it goes back to this old cliche of like, you have to have money to get more money. And there's a huge, you know, there is a huge racial equity and social justice issue at the heart of the way funding works in the nonprofit world. And so I think being willing to say that to funders, like, hey, listen, you're so excited to fund us because we're a growing grassroots organization, or we're serving a population you haven't been able to access before. But, you know, we're also situated right here and have been experiencing systemic racism and oppression as part of the funding cycle for a long time. Funders are talking about this, even if they're not walking their talk yet, you know, and saying, we need some additional resources to move us to the level you expect us to be at to start receiving the funding. You know, we're first-time funders in this space, first-time fundees in this space. So I think being able to have that conversation can be scary, but I think it's important. And also, you know, making sure you're putting money in your budgets and asking for additional capacity around that reporting piece. There's so many requirements once you get into that space, but it takes money and resources and effort to meet their requirements. So reminding funders that they should be funding the means of participating with them, as well as the great work you're doing. But again, great helpline question too. You definitely could post a question there and we could talk a little bit more about grant budgets.
Yes, can I build on what you said real quickly, Amy, and then maybe it's a good time to segue to the helpline so folks can get that information.
Yep.
First, can I ask, how do I pronounce your name correctly? Is it Ty? Like I said before, is it Ty?
It's actually Tyambia, but you see why I tell everybody just call me Ty.
I see. So
like I tell people, like tie on your shoes, tie. Yeah, tie. Like tie on your shoes. Yeah.
Well, Ty, you are speaking the truth. That is so real. And, you know, I think I want to thank you for being willing to voice what I'm sure is a very common experience for many folks on the call, and also many folks who are not here today, right? Like being out in community and working in communities, particularly communities of color, that have been disenfranchised and systemically under-resourced for not just decades, but generations, right? Like that results in what we have today, right? Where we have amazing organizations who continue to be out there serving as anchors and supports to their people, and not having a lot of not having the recognition, two, oftentimes not having the cash type of resources, though very rich in other types of resources like community trust, right? Knowledge of the work, networks, cultural understanding, all different types of things, but oftentimes strapped for cash. And oftentimes never having had enough financial resources to build the infrastructure, right? Or the skills to have those systems and policies and people doing these things. And so I think that one, as Amy said, it's actually really important to name these things and not shy away from, speaking truth to power about how this is all rooted in that systemic inequity. I think that it is a conversation that more funders are either willingly having or having their feet held to the fire about. So it won't be the first time, but it definitely can't be the last time that folks hear about it either. And the more of us that are saying it, I think the more that there is a greater pressure and accountability for folks to recognize, yes, if you're going to have this expectation around this type of financial oversight and compliance, then you got to pay for it. You got to pay for folks to be able to build out that type of infrastructure, to build out that type of training, and to hire the people to be able to manage and sustain that. I will say, like Amy said, if they ask you for a budget, let's see if we can help connect you to the helpline or some other resource to help start to draft a simple budget. But in that budget, write in the cost for hiring a person or getting the type of training or purchasing QuickBooks, right, as a software. Write in those costs at things that it takes to do the work, because it literally does take that to do the work, right? And yeah, I just think that oftentimes the onus is put on us to not only be serving our community, but be doing it without the resources that are actually needed. And then when we struggle because we are strapped for those resources, somehow it's us that looks bad. And that's a real messed up dynamic. You know, that is not because of some individual or organizational deficit. That is because of a system that has been set up to, in many ways, just put a Band-Aid on a problem and allow the root causes to keep on being perpetuated. So that would be just some of the affirmation I wanted to share to the experience that you were kindly sharing with all of us. And then also some of my own experiences and suggestions based on what has helped me in the past. But I think this is a great segue now for Amy to share a little bit about the finance helpline that I think might be helpful to you and to others.
Yeah. So the finance helpline is another part of this pilot of how we support organizations with financial support. And it's a link to SurveyMonkey in the chat, and it will be in your follow-up materials where you can go in and post a question. And the question can be big and it can be small. And the response will either be perhaps like a quick email response if it's a simple question. Most often it's going to result in an invitation for a longer conversation. So finance helpline is the way to get 30 minutes or an hour or even, a follow-up hour to talk about whatever finance challenges or questions you have. Some of you have used the finance helpline, and that's how I met you after our last workshop, or you got the link somewhere else. So a couple things just coming off today, thinking about how you might use it. Happy to, we're happy to get you supported in using the finance checklist, thinking about what to prioritize. Happy to help you brainstorm, draft, or modify your organizational dashboard, and happy, thinking about how we present or talk to our board about finances. Just a couple ideas. And always happy to talk about grant budgets too. So right now in the pilot stage, I am the finance helpline, so I will be getting back to you. And as we grow the pilot, you will get help from other folks too, but mostly it will be me right now. And then I will turn this back over to any questions about the finance helpline. Okay, I hope I'll see some of you on the survey. I'll turn it back. Oh, wait, want to do a big thank you. Caroline, the amazing tech support person and consultant and facilitator extraordinaire. Thanks again for supporting the workshop today so well. Thanks, Sarah. Thanks everyone for being here. Contact information for us, and I will turn it over to Sarah for wrap up.
Wonderful. I am so grateful to Amy and to each of you for really bringing the wisdom and the learning into the room. We want to continue providing learning space to be with each other and share in this way. And so we wanted to do a really quick poll to get some immediate feedback, just to see whether folks felt like this time helped to meet some of the learning goals and objectives that were set out in the beginning. So if you could fill that out real quick, it would help us in being able to get a sense of, what worked and what we can improve. And then as you're filling it out, if you finish, also please feel free to unmute yourself and let us know if you have any ideas or suggestions on how we can build on this training that happened today, any other additional supports that would be helpful, anything we could change or adapt or improve to make it better. Any of that feedback while we have you and while this is still fresh in our minds would be so helpful, because really this is about you and the incredible work that you do in community. It's about supporting you and getting you what you need. So we would love any guidance that you'd be willing and generous enough to offer. And you can feel free to put it in the chat too.
Thanks so much, Amy and Sarah. This is Amanda. And I've been thinking about is we're working a lot on like financial transparency in our team, but it's not everyone's interest or experience. And so as the person who's holding primary financial responsibility, I'm just thinking about how do we what's a helpful way to train staff who aren't in the finances and information that they need to be have financial decision-making power and things like that. So I've just been thinking about is there a training? I don't know, just something that's not like a necessarily super in depth into like the weeds around accounting and finances, but enough to help, I don't know. Yeah. Help expand the financial power, like decision-making power and understanding. So just something I'm thinking about, or yeah, future trainings or something like that. But
That's super helpful, Amanda. And I might follow up with you about this, but just as a question for right now, is that like wanting your kind of program manager staff to be able to better like create and track program budgets? Is it dashboards created for them? Like what, or are there pieces of things that were in this training today that you think would be well suited for the level of financial literacy you're looking to support?
yeah, I think it's just like wanting to make it more accessible, because like you're saying, it's not an accessible field at all. And as we're working on like our anti-racism work as an organization, like it's such an area of power. Like finances are just such an area of power that I want to like spread out. So just like, yeah, kind of maybe more like the financial management side of like, okay, we have this budget, here's how we're thinking about like trade-offs and things like that. Yeah, it's just, I don't know if that's making it clearer, but just something I'm thinking over, since finances isn't the part of everybody's role, but like, yeah, like having information or financial management training so that we can distribute the power. It's not just like, oh, well, sorry, I have a sick kid with me right now. That's what the coffee is. Yeah, like, so the power is actually distributed, and it still isn't just like sitting in my role, like around salaries and where we're putting our resources. Yeah, just something I'm thinking about.
Yeah,
Super helpful.
that's great.
Amy, any follow-up you want to say?
Well, it's just something I've heard from several organizations. And also, I think if you can make the workshop in 3 weeks on budgeting and forecasting, a lot of that conversation around planning is, because my, good philosophy, better practice around budgeting is that it's inclusive of lots of folks inside the organization, because that's where the great wisdom and knowledge lies, and we'll develop better plans that way. So you might get inspired by that presentation, and it's another opportunity for us to think about what is something we could put out for organizations that would help them train the rest of their organizations too. So thank you, that's great. And I'm grabbing from the comments too, internal controls, industry best practices. Oh, it's like my love language all over the place here. It's amazing. I will capture it all. And yeah, in the follow-up, we can also put, I don't know if we have I don't know if we have it yet, the invitation for the next workshop. That's probably on me a little bit.
No, I think that I'll double check on it, but yes, in the follow-up email that we'll send out probably tomorrow or Thursday, it will have the links for you to sign up for the next session, as well as to sign up for the finance helpline and the materials that Amy kindly developed for today's training. So, and you all are always welcome to email with any other thoughts, suggestions, feedback. We welcome it all. And I know that we're over on time, so I don't want to keep folks longer, but I just want to thank you all so much for being here today, spending your valuable time with us and with each other, and for doing the incredible work that you continue to do in community. We need you. And I hope that you feel seen and valued and honored and just so appreciated today, because you truly are. And if there are other ways that we can support you, please just reach out and let us know.
Thank you.
And thank you so much to Amy, who is just the most amazing finance superstar, and also incredibly committed to social justice and to community. And we thank you for being willing to share your own experiences and wisdom today.
Yeah, this is my joy point, working with folks on this topic. So it would make me happy if people reached out. That would be great. I'd love to support you more. Thank you for inviting me, Sarah. Oh, and that, I think we can release everybody.
Yep, that's
Well,
it.
financial awesomeness in your lives and enjoy the rest of your day.
Thank you all so much. Take care.